this little study. We do a lot of these in our sketchbooks, and you can see lots of practice takes place before we actually get to drawing an eye. So I don't recommend maybe starting here, but if you are ready for that, then I will walk you through it step by step. So let's get started. As always, you're gonna start with a little light sketch. If you're heavy-handed, just erase a little of that excess before you start painting. I'm gonna mix up a little yellow and red, maybe some orange, just to get a pretty basic skin tone. I don't think it's that important that you work, tirelessly on trying to get a perfect shade of whatever. As long as it could be human, we're happy. While this area is still wet, lay down some of these softer shadows, finding that crease. And you can see that as soon as I touch, it bleeds. Any areas I didn't want water, I'm just gonna blot with my tissue. Just wipe it away. I have sped this up a little bit just to move through the video a little faster. I use these videos a lot in my class for students who miss class or miss demonstrations, so I just try not to make them too terribly long, especially for high schoolers. While that's drying, I'm going to carefully map out some of the iris with just like a stormy blue, some sort of blue. I have to dance around the highlight. Not dance, literally, but I have to avoid it, tiptoe around the highlight. I don't want to get that part of the paper wet, or else it's going to bleed and get some pigment in there, and I don't really want that, so be careful of that. You can see this reference I pulled off the internet. Looks like it has some shadows on the white, the sclera part of the eye. I see that more often than not. The eye is a sphere, and if you think about it in those terms, it's going to have light sides and shadow sides. And I'm sorry, my hand is right on top of where you need to be seeing. Just let that remind you that a vertical hold on your brush is going to be the way that you can get a little more detail, because you're just using that fine tip. If you press down or you tilt your angle to your brush, it's going to give you a larger mark, and I wasn't wanting a large mark at that point. I just wanted to pop in some of those dark shades. You can see that I'm adding a little red to this green. What I want it to be is like a neutral. So I'm using those color combinations. Instead of using black for every dark that I need, I'm gonna try to use complementary combinations first to give me a more rich tone. I will use black. It's not that I'm against using black, I just don't want to jump to it too soon and have that be the only pigment code. Before you do hair, eyebrows, eyelashes, anything like that, do a little practice, see what kind of mark your brush is gonna make. And I'm just fanning my brush back and forth, almost like a pendulum, just letting it kind of swing and just barely touch the surface of the paper. That gives me a pretty good motion. And that's just my first layer, so it's not quite as scary, because I know I'm gonna go over it a couple of times. Just like I've gone over this iris 2 or 3 times so far, just building up value and building up saturation and color. I mean, honestly, with watercolor, you can do as many layers as you like. It slows you down, but if you're not in a big fat hurry, then you don't have to worry about that. Popping in a little bit of violet, which seems strong right now. But again, trust the value more than you are the local color. I'm not worried about how purple it is right now. It does feel kind of bright, but my reference has a good amount of violet in there. I'm more worried about the value, how light or dark it is. Putting in a warmer brown up here just to transition it. I'm going to show that again. I'm going to lay down color. And I don't want a hard edge there, I want a soft edge, so I'm going to wipe on my tissue, and with a damp brush, I'm going to make that side of the edge soft. So I'm fading it. Only one side of that brown was wet. A little more blue under the eye. Looks like a pretty feminine eye, so I'm just happy to, pop in a lot of color there. And I think that just the color looks fun and bright. Notice the sclera of the eye where I put that blue to shade the eye is barely registering right now. And that's what happens with watercolor. Something that feels really bright or loud really can end up not registering too much in the long run. And if you are using this video to paint along, you might kind of fast forward and see what colors I have in my mixing well, and that way you are more prepared to do those next steps. I know it's moving pretty quickly for a beginner. If I was doing these studies in class, and I will often stop, walk around the room, see kind of what everybody's doing, correct mistakes, clear up any misconceptions, see how much water and pigment they're using. So it's normal for a demonstration like this, which on film is 18 minutes, under 20 minutes, to take us in class with a group of students who are just learning around 45 minutes. For a demonstration and a subject matter as complex as an eye, a realistic eye. So if it takes you the better part of an hour, you're actually right on target. I think that I even came back and did the eyelashes probably later on after it was totally dry. So I didn't even get this all done in an hour of class. So when you look at stuff, on film, it's just the timing is totally different. So I just want you to know to be realistic with your expectations. Don't think, oh, well, she's moving it so fast, she's making all these decisions. For one, I sped it up just a touch for the video's sake, and I'm not actually moving quite that quickly. And if I paused and made decisions, I cut that out of the video. So, for entertainment's sake, you don't need to have all those pauses. But in reality, pause the video. Make sure, you're doing one step at a time and not getting overwhelmed. Because little moves like that where I don't go to my water, I just go to my tissue and drain my brush because I'm using my brush like it's a vacuum, and soaking up some water and lifting an area, or blending an area with a damp brush, just like I'm doing here, just kind of softening. That happens a lot, and it may be something a beginner who's just starting out in watercolor, they don't notice. They think that they have to go to the watercolor paper with a loaded brush every single moment. Well, then they end up with puddles everywhere. Now I'm starting to really get more saturation in my color. In watercolor, very typical to start with, I'd say 50-50. 50% water, 50% pigment. By the end, you're doing 90% pigment, 10% water because you're ready to pop in those darks. And that is exactly what I'm doing now. It's all about building. And for me, it's taken years and years to get to this point. I've seen other people get there very, very quickly. Even students in my classroom just blow my mind. They catch on so fast. I try not to be too jealous because it just took me a long time. But so many of them just super talented and impressive. I did my best to keep my palette in view. These are student, like Academy, Windsor Newton, like the Cotman series. We use these in class. They're not quite as expensive as professional grade, but they give a really rich pigment and they behave the way watercolor should behave. Again, with high schoolers who tend to be, a little more careless. They just may not know any better, but you don't want to waste money, but you want them to have something good to work with. And we use these watercolor sketchbooks, until they are covered. I will recycle. I'll use up every inch of these things. I think this year is my last year for some of them. I'm gonna have to buy some new ones next year, but I encourage them to just test everything. There's no reason to put a mark down and not know what it's going to do. That's why you see all those little practice lashes at the bottom. If you're not sure, try it out. Don't do this kind of work on nice, 100% cotton watercolor paper if you don't have it. You could do it on copy paper just to test it. I don't recommend doing practices on copy paper completely because it's just not going to behave correctly, but always have a little scrap paper around. Painting a watercolor eye is more difficult than other things that we have done. This takes a lot of patience. For the lashes, it takes muscle memory. I'd say if you've never drawn eyelashes before or never practiced that kind of flicking motion, fill a piece of paper with it. Just a regular scrap piece of paper. Just go and make marks. Do a whole row of them and then close your eyes and make marks. Just concentrate on your muscle memory first. I'm gonna add a little more to the eyebrow since I have that dark on my brush. Pop in some darks here. You can see my reference is just like a laminated piece of paper with a bunch of little thumbnails on it. Those are the things we use in class to practice. I reuse them every year because it's color copy and those are expensive. We can't just waste those. So I laminate them, we use them every year. Now for the finishing touch. If you are a purist when it comes to watercolor and you don't add any sort of opaque paint, gouache over your watercolors, you can be done now. But I'm not a purist. I will add whatever it takes to make it look the way I want it to look. So I'm gonna go back and I'm gonna add a little bit of gouache, which is watercolor, but it's opaque. So it applies a lot like acrylic. And if acrylic is all you have and you don't care, then add acrylic. I don't care. Gouache you can kind of re-wet, but acrylic you can't. So I'm gonna go back with some white and clean up some of these highlighted areas with a detail brush. Put a little sparkle here in the iris. Anywhere you want it. I just want to clean some of that area up, make that eye sparkle. Every once in a while, just a little area where the light is just catching some of those eyelashes. And I sometimes go overkill on the eyelashes. I can't help it. I just really like them. I would add more every time. So that's just me. That's a little bit of light, and I just kind of rubbed it out with my finger. A little bit of light there on the tear duct where it can get a little bit more glossy. And if you rewind the video, you can look back and see when I first put that purple down on the eye and how bright it was, and how at that point you might be like, ugh, it's too purple. Ugh, why'd you do blue? That looks terrible. But now it's like, where's the purple? Where's the blue? It just, we hit it, we unified it. It looks more cohesive now because we have all the rest of the elements. So doing some studies like this will help you start to trust that process and build confidence. And I never start my students with full finished polished paintings. We do a week and a half, 2 weeks of little studies like this, guided studies where they're learning to trust, okay, I'm going to put more layers so I don't have to freak out. I don't have to panic. I don't have to blot it all up or start over. Like, I know I'm gonna add more. Sometimes you just have to do more than one painting to be able to gain that confidence. There's no fast forward. There's no, oh, I'm just gonna automatically trust myself. I mean, I haven't seen that ever. So, and if you want to add a few more darks, that's pretty much the last step. When you're happy with it, be done with it. And I hope you have a blessed day and night, and I hope to see you here for more tutorials.